Hi everyone, my name is Professor Vandusky-Allen, and I'm a political science professor at Boise State University. In your Polls 101 course, you are learning about the role that public opinion plays in American politics. In this video, I'm going to discuss how to properly interpret election polls, which are one way in which scholars measure public opinion. I will use data compiled by Real Clear Politics on the 2020 U.S. presidential election in my examples. Note that all of these polls apply to the national popular vote. When survey researchers gather data on voters' intentions in elections, they cannot poll every single voter because it would be expensive, time-consuming, and nearly impossible. So instead, they poll a small sample of a population and apply the findings from the sample to the entire population of voters. For example, in this NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, they surveyed 1,000 registered voters to ask them how they intended to vote in November in the presidential election. You may wonder how survey researchers could use information from 1,000 people to estimate how millions of people are going to vote. It is mathematically possible as long as they get a large enough sample that is representative of the U.S. voting public in general. The larger the sample, the more precise the estimate. So if you look at this sample column here, it tells you how many people they sampled. The NBC News poll sampled 1,000 people, while the NPR poll surveyed 723 people, and the Hill poll surveyed 3,758 people. It is also important to note that the more representative the sample, the more accurate the estimate will be in theory. You could always tell how the survey researchers decided who to sample based on these letters here, RV and LV. RV means registered voters, while LV means likely voters. The reason why they focus on these two groups is because people who are not registered cannot vote, and even if a person is registered, they may not even vote. So focusing on likely voters helps survey researchers make better estimates of what the results will be on election day. Of course, they have to identify who is really likely to vote and who isn't. If they get that wrong, their sample will not reflect the types of people who vote on election day, and their estimates may be off. Once survey researchers survey respondents, they make estimates of each candidate's vote share. Note that they do not make point estimates or precise estimates. Instead, they make estimates within a range. This is where the MOE, or margin of error, comes in. For example, the NBC News poll has Biden at 51% with a margin of error of 3.1. So they do not predict that Biden will get exactly 51% of the vote. Instead, they are predicting he will get anywhere between 51 plus or minus 3.1% of the national vote, or from 47.9% to 54.1% of the national vote. And if you look at the prediction for Trump, the results suggest that Trump will get anywhere between 43 plus or minus 3.1% of the national vote, or 39.9% to 46.1% of the vote. In other words, the highest prediction for Trump is 46.1% of the national vote, while the lowest for Biden is 47.9%. So we can be fairly confident that if the election were to take place today, Biden would win the 2020 national popular vote. However, as we know from the 2016 presidential election, that does not mean Biden will necessarily win the election. In the U.S., the winner of the presidential election is the winner of the Electoral College. In the Electoral College, there are 538 electors. The number of electors each state gets is equal to the number of House of Representative members they have, plus the number of senators they have. So more populous states get more electors, but since every state has 2 senators, that gives smaller states more representation than they otherwise would have. A presidential candidate needs 270 Electoral College votes to win. You can win the Electoral College and not win the popular vote. For example, in 2016, Hillary Clinton received 48% of the national popular vote, while Trump received 45.9% of the national popular vote. But Trump won the Electoral College, so he won. There have been movements in the U.S. to abolish the Electoral College and switch to a popular vote for the president. So, my questions for you are, after the 2016 presidential election, there were widespread protests due to the election results. If Trump wins this November without winning the popular vote, do you expect this to happen again? Why or why not? Who do you think is more likely to support abolishing the Electoral College, Republicans or Democrats? Why? Should the U.S. abolish the Electoral College? Why or why not? Do you think your answer would be different if you identified with a different political party? Why or why not?